This is not just a Bethpage issue. This is a Long Island issue.
Bethpage taxpayers are paying for what you see here because Grumman put this chemical in the ground.
Now you look through a history of 4 or 5 generations of our family. Is this the legacy we're going to leave them?
Grumman Aerospace Corporation and the U.S. Navy were instrumental in the Allies' victory in World War II, but their operations in Bethpage, New York left behind a legacy of waste in the form of a massive underground toxic pool of chemicals called a plume that includes the human carcinogen TCE. The plume has contaminated the hamlet's public drinking water supply wells and now threatens more wells to the south, including those of Levittown, South Farmingdale, and Massapequa, who are now forced to contend with its toxic and ever-growing ripple effect.
So I think the amount of information we're getting is severely lacking because we just don't have people who want to get this thing done. As far as the track for owning 3 goes, it's simple. 4 water districts have sent you a letter. We represent 200,000 people. There isn't anything in that track that was selected based on the letters we wrote.
I've been in the water industry my whole life. The fact that you're saying that 90% of the plume is going to be contained is not acceptable.
PCE and TCE are not anything to fool around with. They must be stopped from entering our drinking water supply, and it is your responsibility to do that.
This is why we're here. The plume has traveled, according to the DEC, at a rate of about 1 foot per day. We think it's much faster than that. It's now about 4.5 miles long and 3.5 miles wide. Because this site, the original contamination of the site, goes back to 1938. This water district has never said that Grumman or the Navy has done anything wrong on that site. Their disposal was in accordance with all of the laws, they met all of the requirements. As a matter of fact, they were out in front as far as industrial waste treatment went. The problem is that through the years, instead of stopping this plume, we've gotten involved in this, what's called a principal responsible party. There has to be someone responsible. I think if we all sat down in a corner and the Navy, Grumman, and NASA decided to clean this up properly with all the horsepower they have, they could do it. We had the Navy install a monitoring well here, and that monitoring well now shows that at 150 feet, the Grumman plume is there. So that's within 0.8 of a mile of our wells.
Well, we don't want their wells to be contaminated. We've done what we think is the best selection to prevent that. There is some potential that eventually 1 or more of the Massapequa wells will be impacted slightly. There is no certainty that will be impacted by any great degree. So the department evaluated the implementability of all the different alternatives and proposed what we think is the best choice, which includes source control. We are removing all the sources of contamination on the park site. There is an existing on-site containment system to prevent any more groundwater from leaving the site, and we're addressing the down gradient sources through the hotspot system, and that will consist of 1 or more extraction wells that will remove 90% of the hotspot.
Our position has always been we do not want wellhead treatment. What we want is the Navy and Grumman to stop the plume by what is known as hydraulic containment. That's just nothing more than a bunch of wells that will extract the water, take it back to the Bethpage site where there would be a plant there. The plant would then treat the water up to drinking water standards and re-inject it into the ground.
That's called the full containment option, and that was one of the alternatives that we evaluated. And looking at the impacts or their costs and benefits of all the different alternatives, and the full containment alternative is very difficult to implement. This is a very densely populated area. It would be very hard to site all of the extraction wells that would be required and the ancillary treatment equipment to extract all that groundwater. Plus, there's the technical problem of what do you do with all that water? And it's fairly easy to say that you can just put it back in the ground, but it's in practical sense, it's not that easy.
Massapequa residents need look no further than their neighbors in Bethpage to see the future, because Caruso's worst fear is already their reality.
Instead of waiting for the regulators to step in and force someone to help us, we went and borrowed the money, bonded the money from our taxpayers so we could build this facility. So they're actually drinking the highest quality water. We all drink this water. It's a distribution system, so the water that's pumped out of here, every resident, in theory, every resident in Bethpage could drink this water that's here.
This is a water filtration plant. It's designed to remove chemicals from the Grumman plume out of the water supply. When we pump the water out of the ground, whatever Grumman chemical is there comes with the water. So the water is above state and federal standards, so we could not give it to consumers. So we have to remove that chemical. You can remove it to a standard of 5 parts per billion. We do better than that. We reduce it to 0. Water is pumped into the tower from the top. Air is blown in the bottom. It manipulates those balls to break the water up into droplets, very tiny droplets, and then the TCE volatilizes. It goes from the liquid state to the gaseous state and comes out the top of the tower.
Oh, wow.
And as I said, the removal rate for the contaminant at this site is approximately 99%.
Wow. Wow.
So the water comes from the stripping tower into these vessels. Each of these vessels is filled with 80,000 pounds of granulated activated carbon, and this removes the balance of the 1% that the stripping tower doesn't use. Now, in sites that are far less contaminated, they use this system alone. This is probably the best system you can get, but this cannot handle the volumes of contaminant that we have in our water supply. So we first must strip it, reduce it to a very low level, then we run it through these vessels, and this removes any remaining contaminant to a non-detect level in parts per trillion.
So we don't have an option to make a mistake. What we're doing here is we're providing the safest drinking water possible. We know there's large contaminations in the ground, large levels, and when the MCL is set at 5, which is the maximum contaminant level set by the state, we can't exceed that. So we have a policy for non-detect, and that's what we're doing.
The Navy called us to a meeting, and they had, in the process of transferring this property to Nassau County, the Navy had to redo a lot of the testing that it had done in the early 90s. They tested along the fence line. And I said, what have you done to test on the other side of the fence line to make sure these homes don't have TCE vapors in their basements? Oh, it's not on the other side, can't be on the other side. Legislator Mangano, then legislator, was with me at the meeting, and we demanded that they immediately test. Oh, we can't, we have to set up a plan. The New York State Department of Health was there. We said, stop the nonsense. Pick some houses and test them. So within 6 weeks, they tested the houses and found vapors in several of the basements. So the state paid for, and it probably was the Navy or Grumman paid for it. They put in vapor removal systems in several basements along 11th Street and maybe 1 or 2 on 10th Street. They now claim that the vapors have been removed. They actually shut off a soil remediation system that was located here. They shut it off in the late 90s because they said it was completely effective and the soils had been remediated. Late 2000s, they find vapors in the basements here. Again, another failure on the part of the DEC. In the mid-90s, we asked that the Navy put some test wells in the neighborhood to make sure contaminants weren't in the soils, not the groundwater, the soils. And they did some testing here. I asked them to do one in the park. They found no contaminants in the soils in the neighborhoods. They did find a small hit in the community park. So I said, what are you going to do? Now, it was below the requirement levels for further investigation. I said, but you've got a hit. You should do something additional in the park to make sure there's nothing there. 1995. That gets us to cancer. The people we call these the number streets, 1st, 2nd, 3rd through 11. And they claim that there are cancer pockets in here. They break this area down into blocks, you know, several block area with anywhere between 200 and 800 people, and you can do a calculation of the cancers reported against the total population to come up with a cancer rate per 100. And sure enough, there is a higher cancer rate here, and another one here, and another one along 11th Street. Not off the charts, but higher than the rest of Bethpage.
This is not just a Bethpage issue. This is a Long Island issue. Growing up as a kid, you know, you could go into the Sound or the Bay and swim and everything was good. We know there's pollution problems, brown tide, stuff like that. If I shut my wells off, okay, it doesn't affect the people of Bethpage, but I don't want Massapequa to go through what we're going through. Why should the residents of Massapequa have to pick up a $30 million tab for a known polluter?
I mean, you know, like Dad said, you know, the water was good, and now you look through a history of 4 or 5 generations of our family. Is this the legacy we're going to leave them? And I don't really think Grumman or the Navy does either, because their legacy of helping this country in times of war, and let's never forget Apollo 13 and the LEM, they certainly, I can't believe they wouldn't want to do this.